What do you get when you mix a saber with a medieval sword? Let's find out. Hi everyone, here again with another sword review. This one I've been delaying, or I've been putting off, but it's long overdue, and it's provided here kindly by the guys over at Unsheathed Sword Reviews. Go and check out my buddies Vic and Jon. They have very kindly lent me this sword as part of our sword prisoner exchange. And it showed up once or twice previously on some of my media here on the channel, and an ongoing review series that I've been doing looking at single-edged swords. This is a sword by famed swordsmith from the United States, Angus Trim, also affectionately known as Gus Trim. Now, Gus Trim has a reputation, rightly so, for swords that have a very high degree of functionality, and he's very sought after, especially by those who are interested in swords, for participating in cutting competitions. There are things about the way he designs swords which have a kind of polarizing opinion about his sword designs. You tend to either really like his swords or not be a kind of fan of them, because his swords tend to stand out very distinctly. So for instance, I have made it known on the channel that I really value historically accurate sword designs that will be drawn from certain specific points in history. And I even criticized this specific sword for being just a kind of blend of different features from different points in time and different elements that you see coming together that didn't really usually get married together when we think of things like falchions. I'm going to get into that a little bit more because I might not have been correct on that. Now, that said, even if his general aesthetics might not appeal to me, I in no way will fault the functionality that Angus Trim is able to bring to his swords. His swords handle wonderfully in the hand, and if what you're interested in is a good-looking sword, and they are quite good-looking, and swords that can perform and outperform just about any other sword, especially at the price point that are being offered, then these are definitely the swords that you would be interested in looking into. So what we have here is a sword that he refers to as a falchion, and it is the F4C.2 Angus Trim falchion. And when I initially reviewed it, I gave it a pretty low historical score, saying that, well, you really don't see falchions in this configuration. So falchions are described typologically under the Elmsley typology. And so James Elmsley has a typology where we talk about many different types of blade profiles across European history, starting in the early 13th century and continuing into the mid of the 16th century. And even though we have a whole bunch of different shapes of blades, they are affixed to basically a cross-hilted typical arming sword style pommel, arming sword style grip, and that's what makes a falchion per se. Now this is where things get tricky. There are other swords that can have these type of single-edged profiles that aren't falchions, things like, for instance, messers, Langes messers from Central and Eastern Europe. And then we also have some kind of weird things that aren't quite falchions, but still will have sword-like grips, which are called single-edged swords. We don't have a better term for them. So initially, I thought that this was a blade type that we see on swords, for instance, in the latter part of the medieval period and going into the early Renaissance, especially in Eastern Europe. We find them on what we would call basically like long sabers, especially those that are butting up against Ottoman contested lands. However, after discussing the designs with Angus Trim and with James Elmsley, it looks like the inspiration from this did come from a specific sword, And while I haven't been able to track down the exact museum piece that it was based on, I think at least I know what family we're referring to. It looks like this was based on a series of medieval single-edged swords. Now, were they falchions? Well, that's a little bit harder to say. These are swords that are found in Central Europe. So you find them in Dalmatia, in Romania, in Hungary, in the Balkans, essentially. And they seem to be heavily influenced by Eastern swords, so perhaps sabers, but swords that may have come from Egypt, from Syria, from Anatolia, but even from places like the Byzantine Empire, so from Greece, etc. And they are characteristic as having kind of more tapering, more narrow tapering central bodies, and of course this wide raised area, which is called the yeoman on it. But while the blade profile has that kind of characteristic, more Eastern look to it, they are put on very European, very medieval style hilts. They have pommels on the end. They have a through tang instead of slab scales or any other type of Islamic style grip. They will usually have different types of crosses than just a straight cross like this. They often have S-style cross, as is common in the Balkans. But this is definitely a medieval type of design. Now, would you call it a falchion? Again, as we mentioned, the Elmsley typology covers more than just falchions, so it's definitely correct to have it fall under that. So I'm not going to fault Mr. Trim for calling it an F4C2 sword. Calling it a falchion's a very flexible term, so you certainly could call it a falchion if you wanted to. But this is a very interesting type of swords. Mr. Trim mentioned that the sword he was basing it on was actually even longer and more curved than this one, and that is true. We do see that in the surviving examples. So they came in a variety of sizes. Oftentimes, rather than single-handed swords, they were hand and a half in length. They might even have been two-handed in length, sometimes with grips that were canted slightly forward. So they're a very interesting group of swords. These Central Asian, sometimes they're referred to as Hungarian sabers, so Hungarian long sabers from the mostly 15th century. And you don't usually think of sabers being a medieval sort of weapon, but this is an example of one of those, if you want to call them that. They don't have a lot in common with later period sabers. And again, there's reason to maybe think that they have more in common with falchions, perhaps. But it's a very interesting classification of weapons, and this one is just wonderful in the hand and feels lovely. And when you hold it, it does remind you of handling a saber, even though it has a lot in common with falchions and arming swords. There are saber-like elements to how it performs and handles. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to showcase how it performs right now. I'm nursing an arm injury, so I will show some previous cutting footage that I took of it when taking it out, and it's very impressive in what it can do in performing both on the primary edge and with the false edge. So a characteristic of these Yelmon is oftentimes they were sharpened, or at least very, very thin, to the point that they could provide an edge that could be used. The geometry of this point, whether it was in line to bring it to a spear point or canted backwards into this type of hatchet point to aid in the primary edge delivering slicing cuts towards the tip, is something of a variation that we see from individual sword to sword. Since the original ones tend to be more spear-pointed, it's conjectured that the original Yelmon may have been there to help reinforce the tip and aid in thrusting, because if the curved blade gets narrower and narrower and narrower, then you end up not being able to deliver cutting action and risking the strength of the tip when delivering thrusts. By broadening it out, suddenly you have more cutting power and a better ability to deliver a cut.
And unfortunately, my battery ran out. But I just wanted to say that this is a really fun sword in the hand. So you can see here that it's executed quite well in Angus Trim's very characteristic style. And obviously, it performs very, very well as a compromise cut and thrust sword, although it's geared more to cutting than it is to thrusting. So, if you have the opportunity to get a chance to handle one of Angus Trim's handiwork, I definitely take it up. This is a really pretty design that is much more grounded in history than I initially thought. That's all for now. We'll be back here on the channel to take a look at some more swords next time. Until then, take care.